Morning. Happy Sunday. Welcome to Sunday Assembly, the Phoenix edition. My name is Justin D'Agostino. I'm one of the organizers here. Could everyone just stand up? We're going to do a little special exercise just to kind of get the blood flowing. We're gonna inaugurate something today, an official Sunday Assembly thing. So count yourselves lucky because you're part of the first time ever. We are going to inaugurate the official Sunday Assembly hug. Jason, could you come up here for a second? Everyone's like, oh God, what is he doing? Okay, now here's the thing about hugs. Raise your hand if you're standing next to someone you don't know. Okay, so the majority. Now here's the thing. You don't know what they did last night. They might need a hug. You don't know. You don't know how their week was at work. You don't know what was going on. They could really use a hug. Think for a second, when was the last time you got a hug? Like a good, just fantastic hug. Was it a day? Was it a week? Was it a month? Have you never had one? Okay. So here's how this is going to work, and I'm going to demonstrate it with my cohort here, Jason. Now the thing is, I kind of do know what he did last night. So this is a special kind of hug because I have that understanding with him. So here's how the Sunday Assembly hug is going to work. I'm going to demonstrate it, and then we're going to implement it. Let's do it again. One more time. Okay, there's 3 pats. The 3 pats is key. You do not hold and cling because that's a little creepy. You just do the pat thing. So now the point is key because the point communicates, I might know why you need the hug, but I probably don't. So turn to someone first that you don't know, real quick. Just look at someone you don't know. I know this is weird. Just hang. If you have to share with people, you can just figure it out. But try it out. Point, and then 3 pats. All right, now you're going to do it one more time with someone you do know. And if you came here alone and you don't know anyone, Jason is going to come around and give you a fantastic hug. So just raise your hand, and he'll come by and give you a hug. Okay, so find somebody you know, and if not, raise your hand, and here comes Jason. Go. All right, cut it out. This is nonsense. But no, this is great, right? Like, it's kind of weird to hug someone you don't know. But, I was thinking about the hug and why do we have it? Like, it's kind of a weird thing. Like, why you just kind of wrap your arms? Like, why don't you just grab someone's forearm? Or, like, why is it that kind of thing? And it didn't make a whole lot of sense to me other than, I like to get a hug every now and then. So thank you so much for putting up with me. I lost a lot of sleep over that one. So thank you. We're going to have Jason come up real quick and intro. He's a resident comedian extraordinaire. Jason Carr, ladies and gentlemen.
Comedian and extraordinaire may be an overstatement. Hi. I apologize for missing this entire side of the room. So if you need a hug, just point at me later. So I really like this idea of an experiment, like a year without God, and it got me thinking. Kind of when I first heard about it, like that's a great general template to just try things in your life. So I came up with came up with a list. That's taped. That's all right. I came up with a list of other years without things that I'm just going to kind of put out there to the public. If you like or resonate with any of these, just feel free to run with it. Start up a blog. Get going. So the first one is a year without dog, which admittedly is a little bit derivative. Then I've got a year without brushing your teeth. So I really want to put the dental establishment to the test, see if that's a real thing. A year without salad, which if you're someone with a diet like Mandy, it's in here somewhere, you got to be careful with that one. That would result in starvation. A year without showers. It's more of a social experiment. Can you still get laid? Probably only at Burning Man. Speaking of a year without sex, it sounds like a terrible idea, right? You should try growing up Mormon. A year without Netflix, which I think for some people would be harder than the last one. A year without any armadillos whatsoever. Was maybe drunk when I wrote that. These guys are sneaky, though. You never know when there's one around. A year without Facebook, which that's just a joke. That's not possible. A year without looking upwards. Kind of questioning, do tall people exist? Is the sky real if you don't look at it? A year without not drinking a beer every day, which I guess would only be hard for recovering alcoholics. A year without any cockroaches in my apartment. That one's really just kind of nice. And a year without any chips and salsa. And for those who know me personally, you know that would be kind of the ultimate challenge. I was raised in a very salsa-centric environment. Chips and salsa brings me a lot of personal joy. Kind of questioning my own consumption levels of chips and salsa fills me with existential dread. So, all right. With no further ado, we will continue to keep introducing things. And let me know if you start a blog. I would like to read it.
Is this on? Okay, awesome. All right, I'm going to do a quick intro for those of you who are new about what this whole crazy thing is called Sunday Assembly. Let me pull out my notes here. Fantastic. So Sunday Assembly was started about 2 years ago by a couple of atheistic British comedians in London who really liked the whole church thing. They just didn't like the other stuff, like the God stuff and the moral absolutism and all this other kinds of things that a lot of us might feel a little bit uneasy with, since that's why we're here. So they started it, they launched it, it caught on. There's about 70 globally, and there's about 20 here in the States. So if you're ever traveling, feel free to look up Sunday Assembly and see if they have one going on in the city. It's mostly in major cities, but all across the U.S. And so this here is the Phoenix edition. We got started in September, and we've been doing it once a month. So this is our 8th gathering. So we still kind of consider this to be the initial inaugural starting of the Sunday Assembly here in Phoenix. So consider yourselves a part of kind of the initial group for being here. I want to read the statement that's on the back of the cards that you guys were given. Could you pull those out real quick? This is a brief, serious moment. So I'm going to read it real quick. It's on the back of the little cards that you were given when you came in. It says, "In short, this is a community trying to live better, help often, and wonder more. We are trying to replicate many of the beneficial aspects of church without the religious dogma and supernaturalism. We are not anti-theist, just anti-absolutist. More on that in just a little bit. No one has all the answers. We prefer inclusion and diversity. Sunday Assembly is a community-focused rather than ideologically driven organization. This means our ideas should take a backseat to our interest in meeting with others. Ideas are important, but our hope is that we can see beyond many of the things that divide us and focus on what can bring us together. So first, to live better, help often, and wonder more. That's kind of like the core guiding principles of Sunday Assembly that was started by Sanderson and Pippa there in London. I guess you could call it like our sort of dogma, if we had one. And the basic idea with that is live better. You might have a great life, but there's always room for growth. And so we want to just have a community of people who are interested in you doing your thing better, whatever that is. And there's no real clear right and wrong. There probably are some guidelines, like, I wouldn't recommend running out into the middle of freeways on a regular basis. That would not be a way to live better. So there are some kind of guidelines, and so we just want to encourage people that there's always room for growth and to live life to its fullest. Beneath that is just the simple idea that we're all going to die. And so this is kind of the one life that we have, and so let's have at it. Let's have a good time. Let's do it as best we can. The second, help often. People need help. Jason needs help. I promise you on that. I need help. People need help. And so it'd be great to have a community where we just are we have the feelers out, and if someone needs some furniture moved on a weekend, they're moving and they don't have anyone, they can contact us and we'll get some people there and we'll help out. And we're just going to help because helping's a good thing to do and people need help. And then the wonder more. This is kind of my closest to my heart. We like the questions. We like things being open-ended. We like the in-between. There's no book of answers. There's no clear thing in the sky that's telling us what to do. And so we like the exploration. We want to have a community that's kind of huddled around the exploration of life. And this kind of ties into the anti-absolutist term that I use. I know it's kind of a weird term, but, things are not cut and dry. Life comes in many different shades. And most traditional forms of religion tend to kind of promote this idea that they figured it out, right? They got the revelation and they have things all kind of squared away. We're kind of running things a little bit different here. And so there are no absolutes. Life is a tremendous mystery, and we're excited to explore this together. An absolutist would just be someone who's bound to rules, and sometimes they impose those rules on other people. Everything is set in their head. So, we're just getting going here. Like I said, this is our 8th gathering, and we're still trying to figure some things out. Our next assembly in May is going to be a town hall, and it's going to be back here. It's actually going to be in another one of their rooms downstairs, and it's basically going to be an opportunity for all of us to kind of brainstorm and really network and talk about what this could be and what this can become and what we've learned from the previous 8. Moving forward, how this could become something that's really fun, to meet and do some really awesome stuff. So we're going to kind of really open it up for everyone to contribute. We're going to kind of open up the lines of communication. And so if you can make it to that, the information's on that little card. It's May 24th. We would love to see you there. So if you dig what we're trying to do, we would love to have you join in. The more the merrier. With that being said, I'm going to play a special video for you guys, and then we'll have our main speaker come up. Thanks so much.
Hey, Phoenix. Good to see you. I enjoyed being in Phoenix. I think I've never been in Phoenix before. Thank you. I normally pass through the airport on my way somewhere else. I once was stuck in Phoenix when I was supposed to be in Puerto Vallarta, which was, probably not the best first impression. It was 114 degrees that day, and I had to walk about a quarter of a mile to the nearest restaurant, and there were no sidewalks. So I'm kind of reorienting myself to Phoenix, and I like the name Phoenix. It's good for me, for my life, for my story. This kind of myth of the phoenix rising from the ashes. I love it. The first 3 letters of Phoenix are pho, which I also love. So I think that's great. So yeah, I'm really digging Phoenix, and I hope to be back. Appreciate the hospitality that the organizers of Sunday Assembly here have shown too. We had a good time chatting last night. So thanks for inviting me. It's fun to be here. A couple of the images that you saw in the video were actually Sunday Assembly Los Angeles, where I've been a few times, and my good friend Ian Dodd is the organizer, one of the organizers there. So today I want to talk to you about something that's been important to me for a long time, while I was a pastor and even now after, not being a pastor anymore. And the title of my talk today is called We Are Made of Stories. When I first did the research into this topic, I Googled that expression just to make sure I wasn't plagiarizing someone. I thought, wow, that's such a clever title, you know, I was proud of myself. And I thought certainly someone has come up with this before. And there were a few, unfortunately, references to it. So it isn't original with me. But it, in this form, I think I've never seen anybody doing it. So I was like, good, I can, speak about this, for myself. And so as I was typing "We Are Made of Stories" into Google, you know how she, suggests things as you type, right? Like, we are made, and then already Google is telling you what she thinks you might be looking for. And so I was really intrigued because the first one was "We are made of stardust," or star stuff. And then the second one was stardust. And I thought, even Google's losing her faith. You know, it's like, even Google doesn't know what she's made of, you know? And then the third one was "We are made in the image of God." And the fourth one was "We're made of meat," which was much less inspiring, I thought. I thought, yeah, it's not nearly as poetic. So I thought, yeah, we're made of stardust and or star stuff, as Carl Sagan said, and as Lawrence Krauss has reminded us more recently. And it's an inspiring idea to me, actually, a post-theistic kind of inspiring idea that we're made of all the same stuff that everything we can see with our eyes and things that we can't see with our eyes are made of. We're made of this material of dead stars from billions of years ago. We're made of atoms, 7 billion atoms. But we're also made of stories. I mean, as I think about science and what science tells us and teaches us, it's incredibly inspiring, and I'm sort of rediscovering science since college. I was the last actual science education I did. But as I was trained in the liberal arts, and so as I explore science, there's this liberal arts part of me, that's sort of like, there's got to be more than just atoms. What happens when we put all those atoms together into a human being? It's more than just the sum of its parts. And this is where I think it's important to remember that we're made of stories. We live by and live into stories. All the events of our lives, every experience that we've ever had, both happy and sad, both wonderful and tragic, have made us the people that we are today, for better or for worse. And I think when I was inside religion, there was a lot of sort of guilt about the bad stuff and sort of excitement about the good stuff. And I find it much easier now to simply say, this is who I am. The bad things, the good things, all together, they just make me the person I am today. And that's just who I am. And I'm grateful for all of those experiences. Every person we've ever loved, every conversation we've ever engaged in, every place we've ever visited, every song we've ever listened to, every book we've ever read, all is a part of us. It makes us who we are as unique individuals. And it connects us to other people who have had other experiences. And as we share our experiences, our stories with one another, we create relationships, which is another part of our story. And then together, these little stories of our lives create narratives. Narratives are what I think of as like super stories. Narratives are stories that describe groups of people's experience in a kind of generic way. They give form and structure to our existence. They tell us how to act, how to respond, what to believe. And we really, again, can't live without these stories shaping our lives. Sometimes we call them culture. Narratives are like culture. They form us inside of a system, a cohesive system of acting and responding. When someone sticks their hand out to you like this, you don't have to think, my goodness, why is that person thrusting their hand towards me? What shall I do with it? We just instinctively put your hand out to shake their hand because we know that that's a part of a story that we share together. This is how we greet one another. Or we slap each other on the back 3 times, like gently, so as not to injure the person. But this is another way of, we're familiar with kind of when someone walks towards you and opens their arms, you're not thinking, oh my God, is he going to tackle me? You're thinking, oh, he's reaching in for a hug, and you may or may not like that, but we know what that's about. It's kind of these stories give shape to how we live our lives. Take, for example, a much bigger story, a story that we should all be fairly familiar with. It's called The American Dream. This narrative of the American Dream is a powerful story. It tells us who we are, or who we ought to be, where we came from, and where we're going. It almost is like a religious story, isn't it? It answers, or attempts to answer, some of those same kind of basic questions. It tells you what you should be aiming for with your life, what you should be dreaming about, and how you should get there. And there are little stories inside of the big narrative of the American Dream that are like examples of, Sam, who made well of his life. He tried really hard, and he bought a house and sent his kids to college, and then retired and traveled the United States and maybe the world and enjoyed his retirement years. I mean, these are the examples, the little stories that all together, these little stories make this big story called the American Dream. We even capitalize the A and the D just to make sure we know that this is a big story, right? This is a narrative that we're all supposed to be part of. And these narratives hold us in a way, like a gravitational force. They hold us in orbit around the central values and ideas that narrative teaches us. And this can be good. It holds us in shape. It gives us some structure to our lives, helps us know how to act. It enables us to do things in the world without having to analyze and think about every little thing. So without this structure, we would be consumed by minutia. But these narratives also hold us back. They limit us, they restrict us, and they limit our ability to see other possibilities, to accept other narratives that other people may be living by. They can cause conflict between people that are living by different narratives. You may even think that someone that's living by a different narrative is crazy, or irrational, or stupid, and they might think the same of you. So what are some of these narratives? What are we actually talking about? So when I was going through my year without God, I started thinking about what are the big stories that we latch onto as people, that we live out of and into. And there are only a finite number of them, and they almost always have to do with meaning and purpose. Stories that describe how we're meaningful and purposeful people and what we should do with our lives in meaningful and purposeful ways. And also this interesting little word, salvation, which if you grew up in the church or in any religion, salvation is kind of this loaded word, but it's also an ordinary noun that we might use. You might use more commonly the word save rather than salvation. It's kind of religious-y kind of, use of the word. But these narratives that I'm going to quickly run through, about 4 of them, many cases are about salvation. So the first one that we are familiar with is the religious narrative. And I start there because it's the one that I spent the last 2 years sort of undoing in my life, or that it sort of undid me in a way. So the religious narrative tells us that we're made in God's image and that our purpose is to give honor and glory to God. And in the end, God will save us for eternity. He will save our lives. Even though we may suffer now, we will have peace and prosperity later. And many of us in this room have spent a lot of time inside the orbit of that narrative. And it's easy to see how that narrative is about meaning and purpose and salvation. Even though you disagree with it perhaps, it's still a story about meaning and purpose that a lot of people, right, still live very closely to. But there are these 3 other big narratives. And the next one that I encountered as I sort of left the religious narrative, and I'll talk more about how that happened in a minute, the next narrative that was waiting to greet me was the scientific narrative. The narrative about science and technology. So in this story, science answers the big questions about our existence and about our purpose if we have one. Where we came from, where we can expect to be in the future, and how we can be saved. Right? Science can literally save you. How many of you have been saved by science? Have you had a surgery that saved your life, or prescription medication that makes you, me too. So science has literally a salvific role in our lives. We turn to it to extend our lives, to make us live longer, to make us live a higher quality of life, to save us from an illness that would have killed our grandparents. We can easily survive it. Technology is making us, in some ways, superhuman, right? I got a new iPhone. I feel a little superhuman. I think when I get the Apple Watch, I'll feel even more superhuman. I'm really excited. But that's only, partly a joke, right? Like these wearables and replacement body parts. Some of you may even have replacement body parts inside of you right now that are created by science to extend your life. And more scientists are projecting that they can extend our lives much further through technology. So this is an interesting story. It's a meta story about where we came from, where we're going, how we get there, how do we make meaning out of it, and how we can ultimately live forever, maybe. I don't know. I don't think there are very many scientists saying we're going to live forever, but there's an aspiration, right? People want to live longer, at least, if not forever. Then there's the capitalist narrative. This is where we usually start stepping on people's toes. This is an economic story about how we live the good life, right? That if we work hard and if we apply ourselves and we innovate and we use good economic principles, we can make more money. And as the theory goes, that money is shared with our employees who also make money, and then they can take care of their families. And in a way, this economic narrative is designed to save us from poverty, to save us from starvation, to save us from obscurity. And we don't have time to go into all of the ways that this operates in our lives. It's not all bad. It's not all good. It's just a story that is waiting in the wings when we are looking for stories to say, this is the story that will help you live a better, good, prosperous life. And then there's the nationalist narrative, and we're here gathered in the United States of America, and that's the country that I'm most familiar with. And this story also tells us what our value is, what it means to have purpose and meaning, and this gives us this idea that America will save us, that when we're really in danger, the government will protect us from foreign enemies, from domestic enemies. And indeed, this is true. It would be interesting to know, probably terrifying to know, how many near misses were averted by people behind the scenes, like making sure terrorist attacks don't happen or making sure that other bad things don't happen. There's a whole system at work to protect us, to keep us safe, and to keep us moving towards this, to mix the stories, our prosperous economic story that we are all a part of. It's not just designed to save us, also the American story, or the nationalist story of America, is also designed to save the whole world, which also resonates with me as a Christian. I heard stories about saving the whole world. Here's a quote for you, and we'll play a little game, see if you can name the author of this quote. "We will persistently clarify the choice before every ruler and every nation, the moral choice between oppression, which is always wrong, and freedom, which is eternally right." Notice, eternally right. "As hope kindles hope, millions more will find it. By our efforts, we will have lit a fire as well, a fire in the minds of men. It warms those who feel its power. It burns those who fight its progress. And one day, this untamed fire of freedom will reach the darkest corners of the world." That's a big story, isn't it? That's a totalizing story about the whole world and how American democratic ideals will save not just us, but everyone. Who do you think was the author of that quote? It doesn't really matter. Jefferson? George W. Bush, second inaugural address. It's inspiring, I mean, it might be a little overreach, but it's inspiring nonetheless. It kind of says, I really appreciate the freedom and the prosperity that I have as an American. Others would be good to have that too. We could have long discussions about if that's truly good, but that's what happens inside of big stories. We have these debates about what is really the good life and how do we achieve it. But notice that all of these narratives assume a need for salvation. We all want to live. We all want to survive. The religious narrative is concerned about ultimate survival, eternal life. But each of us has evolved to survive at all costs. We have a tremendous will to live. And we want to live forever, literally or figuratively. We want to live on. We want to be remembered. Now, these narratives are not bulletproof, as you probably have guessed by now. Some combination of these narratives, and probably others, hold us in orbit, as I said, and it makes a kind of stasis or stability in our lives possible when these narratives are working well. But sometimes these narratives fail us. Sometimes the story doesn't turn out the way we were told it should turn out, or the ending gets screwed up, right? Usually that's what happens. The ending gets screwed up, and we're like, wait, we were supposed to get the house and the family and the retirement. Like, what happened to that? I thought that's what my dad's story told me. My dad taught me that story, right? Work hard, stay with your job. My dad stayed with the same company until he got laid off once, then got another job and retired there. That was how he lived his life. And he's not rich, but he's doing okay. He's going to be fine. It's amazing. Actually, I marvel at it. It's like, wow, it's like almost like a museum piece. You kind of think, whoa, this is how the former generation lived. They had this kind of security if you were white and middle class and educated. So when these stories begin to fail us, as they will do, it gives us an opportunity to enter another orbit. And usually when these stories fail us, I sometimes call this escape velocity, where we can escape the story that's been holding us. And it's sometimes a personal loss. It could be a death in the family. It could be you discover that you have a chronic or disabling disability, a medical condition. It could be economic failure. It could be an economic failure that strikes you personally, or it could be a more systemic, nationwide economic failure where your home is foreclosed, but not just you, but 20 people on your street and 1,000 people in your city. And all of a sudden, like, we're scratching our heads about this economic story and the American dream, and we're thinking, wait a second, this story isn't perfect, there's something going wrong here. Or it could be a societal crisis like 9/11, which we didn't see coming and we weren't ready for, and suddenly we were scratching our heads going, gosh, I thought America was supposed to protect us. I thought we were impervious to this kind of attack. What does it mean to be American? What does it mean to be human? What does it mean to be a member of the global society in which this kind of thing happens on a regular basis in places all over the world? So these stories hit road bumps, and when they do, we have an opportunity to think critically about our stories that we necessarily live inside of. What's difficult about narratives or worldviews is that we're blind to them most of the time, right up to the point when we're not. And then we go, oh my gosh, this is the story that I've been told, and it's a lie. Usually something outside of us is required to nudge us or give us that escape velocity, but then we reach that place where we're sort of between stories. And I think it's at that place where many of us find ourselves. We're kind of in between stories. We're not sure who we are or where we are or if we can trust anyone or anything. We're sort of floating between this story tells me I'm going to be safe and secure. This story tells me I could be safe and secure in a different way. I'm feeling pretty unsafe and insecure. And that's kind of the world that we find ourselves in often when we have these escape velocity moments in our lives. In my own case, I could feel, years before it happened, the Christian story running out of gas for me. I felt it personally in my own life. After years of prayer and Bible study, I felt the absence of God so acutely. I had developed a theology about the absence of God, like many theologians have done. I told my congregation that the absence of God was actually the evidence of God's presence. Think about it. No, there's no. Okay. So yeah, but this was the story that everybody experiences God's absence. If you give everyone some truth serum, and sit them down and say, have you ever experienced the absence of God, the sense of God's absence? Every believer will say, oh yeah, of course, I felt the absence of God. So you create a theology that says that's when you're walking closest with God, right? So, and then after a while, you're like, that's just bullshit, right? It's just the absence of God. I think it's just the feeling of absence that we all feel because we're alone. That's probably what it is, right? So you kind of in the back of my mind, I have this little splinter, we're really alone, right? Oh, no, we can't think about that. So we create a theology about how it's normal and how Jesus felt the same thing in the Garden of Gethsemane right before he did the most ultimate thing on the cross. He felt abandoned by his Father too. So if Jesus felt the absence of God, certainly it's not extraordinary for us. So things like this began to happen. I could also see it institutionally. I could see that the church institutionally was bankrupt, that it was facing a system-wide, not just in the Adventist church, but system-wide, facing a crisis of integrity and morality. And as a pastor, I was paid in some sense to keep the story going, keep this narrative going, and to keep people inside the orbit of it. Even while I myself am on the outside of the orbit, very little gravity is still holding me inside. I was told to drive that car a few more miles, and I wanted to say, guys, we might want to look under the hood here. There's some really bad noises coming from down there, and I feel like we don't want to be in the middle of Utah when the thing breaks down because you're going to die out there, so we should look, but nobody's paying you to ask those kinds of pesky questions or to, draw their attention to the noise that's coming from under the hood. That's not what church structures do. Church structures, much like corporate structures, are designed to present to the public outside a very good picture that everything's okay and that, profits are increasing, market share is increasing, everything's going well. Meanwhile, in the boardroom, everybody's scrambling to make it so. Right? Like you tell a story to the world and then you scramble on the inside to say we got to do whatever the hell we got to do to make sure that's true, right? So that we aren't caught in a lie. And the same thing happens in churches and structures. We sing one more verse of Just As I Am, convince ourselves that God is going to save us in the end and that nothing truly bad can happen. On a personal level, my relationships were in shambles. My therapist, who, if I hadn't been seeing her weekly for the last 4 years of my pastoral ministry, I probably would have fallen completely apart. I used to say I would have had a real breakdown. Then I thought, well, I kind of did have a real breakdown. But at least I had a breakdown in a really constructive way for me. I was able to sort of sort through the mess. It's sort of like grief. There's no shortcut to go through grief. You just have to go through it, and it feels terrible, and you just have to do it. And if you don't do it, you'll end up doing it later. So this kind of, leaving a big story like religion or any other big story, it's painful and there's really no shortcut through it. You just have to sort of ride it out and do the work, which I think the work is honestly addressing the questions and the challenges that you've been shelving in the back of your mind for a long time. And so that's why I did, a year without God. I wanted to take a year to decide for myself if God was there. And so people always ask me, in fact, someone just accused me last night on Facebook. I got off the plane, checked Facebook, there were 20 comments on this thing I was tagged in, a bunch of Christians, accusing me of being unethical and all that. And then I made a comment, and then I went to dinner with these guys, and I came back, and there was 180 comments on the thread. And I was like, oh shit, this is bad. So I sorted through some of it, and it was the same kind of hand-wringing. But backing up to when I left the church, I finally left my denomination in March of 2013, so just 2 years ago, when my boss and I reached a mutual agreement that I wasn't Seventh-day Adventist anymore. Apparently, I was the last one to find out. I'd been manipulating that sucker for a long time to make it fit. And I had a good thing going. I loved my congregation. I didn't want to quit. I didn't want to stop doing what I was doing, but I realized the jig was up. And it was a painful separation, but it was also freeing. And shortly after resigning my position, I said, people said I looked healthier. I had less burden and stress on my face and in my shoulders. And I was given a gift, really, the freedom to step back and say, is any of this worth saving? And that simple question led me to question the Seventh-day Adventist Church's narrative, and then to go a little bit wider and question the Christian narrative, and then to go a little wider than that and question the entire God narrative, and to ask myself, is any of it real? And even if it might be, is any of it important? Because, one of the things that you quickly discover if you're going down this road and exploring, questions about the existence of God is that if, nobody really has proof of anything, and if we did, we wouldn't be talking about it right now. So in the absence of any kind of evidence or proof one way or the other, I came fairly quickly, I would say April, May, to the conclusion that whether or not God existed, it was fairly irrelevant to my life. So I thought, well, yeah. So Christians will sometimes say to me, but you don't know for sure that God doesn't exist. And I said, yeah, of course, I don't know for sure much of anything, really. But I certainly don't know for sure if God exists. So until God shows up and does something, worth noticing, I'm just going to assume that he doesn't, I guess, and live my life. I feel more fulfilled. I feel more focused. I feel more aware of myself and my place in the world. I feel more aware of the world and what my part is in it. And And so I just went through that process of just questioning things. And I think the thing I say now more than ever to Christians or people who are on the fence is just not to allow anyone to tell you that a certain question is not to be asked or not okay to ask. That all questions, all intellectual curiosity is healthy to at least begin to explore the kinds of big metaphysical questions that you may have. I also learned that reaching escape velocity on the religious narrative does not mean that I land suddenly in a neutral, objective, narrative-free space where I can see the world as it really is. I hope we can all recognize that there is no one way the world really is. Every narrative will try to tell you that they have the privileged view of the world, the most panoramic, literally this word panoramic, the view of everything, the way the world really, really is. And that's part of the mechanism that narratives use to kind of establish their priority in people's lives and in our social life. So if you reach escape velocity on the God narrative, the scientific narrative is waiting in the wings to say, welcome to reality, which is what a lot of people said to me. And in a sense, science does portray a lot of reality that religion denies or prohibits the inquiry into even. And so there was a huge liberation, like, oh wow, there's a scientific narrative that I had been just put completely aside in my life that describes a great deal about questions that, like, it's so interesting. Like, people will say on Facebook and Twitter, well, what about near-death experiences? And I'm like, well, here are 6 articles you can read about that describes pretty much what, medical doctors and scientists think happens in a near-death experience. You can read about it and learn about it and keep track of what new scientific discoveries are coming out about that and understand it the best that we can. And I was so relieved by that. I thought, wow, this is really healthy and powerful. At the same time, I hope that as we reach this escape velocity on one narrative, that we would develop a healthy skepticism toward all narratives, toward all attempts to sell you the really real view of life and everything. We should be skeptical about the narratives that are competing for our loyalty, always examining them rather than blindly stumbling from one ideology to another. Our society is going through a crisis, you may have noticed. One of the reasons it feels like we're slipping backwards, I think, into some old behaviors that we thought were behind us. Racism, sexism, xenophobia. I mean, does it feel to you like there's more of that now for some reason? More racism, more violence towards people that are different than us, more homophobia? And my own sort of very armchair sort of analysis of that is that this is what happens when people freak out about the fact that they're losing the dominance of their narrative. There was a narrative that shaped the reality, more or less, of our entire country. And the more different people join us in this big family that we call the United States of America, some of them are Muslim, and some of them are Hindu, and some of them are atheists, and some of them are all sorts of different things. And we now have to share our society with a lot of people that are different than us. And that's hard, like our moms tried to teach us to share when we were little, and we never really learned very well that we had to share things. And now, so politicians, what they do primarily, because they're the ones who represent us, as they see that narrative losing grip in society, they grab on tighter, and they ramp up, they escalate the stakes in that conversation. And so my sense is, and this is happening in the Christian world as well, as more and more people become atheists. There was another great CBS special that aired today featuring Neil Carter. Some of you may read Neil's blog on Patheos. It's called Godless and Dixie, and the black non-believers of Atlanta. Great little profile on some non-believers in the Bible Belt. And what happens when this kind of thing happens is that people feel they know they're losing power. They know they're losing control of the story that meant so much to them. And fine that it meant so much to them. But now as that begins to erode and wear thin, people grasp on even tighter. They try to enact laws to prevent the narrative from unwinding even more. And people get angry, and people even die. People get shot, when they shouldn't be. And so I think we're entering into a new era. We don't know exactly what it looks like yet. We're starting to enter a period of time in which there's no one cohesive story about what it means to be human. And you might think that's a good thing, and I agree with you that it's a good thing, but it's also still terrifying and unsettling and disorienting. Because freedom is frightening. Because freedom moves you out of a place of security into a new landscape where all bets are off, and we don't know how the end of the story is going to be written. And so from where will come our story about human dignity, since these other stories are falling apart? Where will come the source of our hope and courage? And I think it has to come from us, from the we. We right here this morning in Phoenix. This is where the next story comes from. Together, we're writing the narrative that our children will live by. And it's up to us, no pressure, but it's up to us to fashion out of we can use a Phoenix metaphor here, out of the dust, out of the rubble of these old narratives, the thing that will emerge, right? The thing that will become the way we choose to be as human beings in our society. And that's what makes me so excited about Sunday Assembly. It's what makes me excited about humanism in general and this emerging movement of humanists and the gatherings that are happening all over the country, whether it's Sunday Assembly or something else, where people are beginning to say, okay, that narrative about religion isn't working for me anymore. I don't buy it, but there are some remnants there that are good. I kind of like. I think we still need to hang out with one another and support each other and laugh together and cry together. And then there's some elements of this story about capitalism that are probably worth holding on to, and there's some elements of this story that are probably worth holding on to. Let's create a new world together that we can all live in together peacefully. And to me, that's the work of democracy that we have to do together. So that's why I'm kind of where my life is focused now, why I still feel very much like a pastor in some ways, just with a slightly different message. So thank you so much for what you're doing here, and thank you for inviting me to be a part of it today.
Ryan, thank you so much for that amazing talk. It really got me thinking about a lot of different things, specifically with what we're trying to establish here with this community and the idea of these intersecting narratives and stories. There's these big, grand narratives that we deal with, but then there's also the small ones, the individual ones. And I think one of the worries I have and what I've sort of witnessed in my own lifetime is we tend to just segregate ourselves willfully into interest groups, right? We're into things. And so we find the people that are into the same things that we're into. And I think one of the unique things about an opportunity like Sunday Assembly is an opportunity for us to come together and have a lot of different interests intersect, a lot of different stories and narratives come together. I know quite a few people in this room, and I know the distinction and the differences between them. And I've always felt in my own life like I want to stay kind of out there. I don't want to segregate myself too much and just hang out with people that are just like me. I want to put myself out there a little bit more. And so we're just simply trying to establish a community of people that disagree, and that's okay. We're trying to establish a community of where people are like, I don't have a whole lot in common with that person, but I'm going to make an effort to find something in common with that person, because that's where a lot of growth can happen. That's where a lot of growth in my own life has happened. So, like I said a little bit earlier, we're just getting going, and having a guy like Ryan Bell come and share his narrative, and it's certainly I guess I could call it like a fount of inspiration, because I know that there's probably so many people like Ryan in similar kinds of capacities who have this kind of thing buried because they know that if they let it out, their life will kind of unfold. So thank you so much for your courage and your willingness to just put yourself out there like this. It's really an amazing thing. So we're going to do a Q&A. I'm sure you guys have some questions about his experience and what he's learned over the last couple of years and the transition and all that kind of stuff. We're going to bring down a second microphone down here. If you don't feel comfortable coming forward with a question and speaking that, Daniel has some note cards. So if any of you want a note card or write a question, raise your hand and Daniel will bring you the note card right now. No questions. Uh-oh. There's one right there. All right, we'll bring the microphone down. I have about 30 or 40 questions, so yeah.
We should be done in time for dinner. Someone want to shout out a question while we're waiting for the technology? Hey, Chris.
That Seventh-day Adventists live longer than those people through their lifestyle and how they eat and everything. And you want to comment on if people do that type of stuff?
Yeah, so he's saying that there's some research that says that Seventh-day Adventists live longer due to some lifestyle things, and do I do those things? There has been some research about that. Blue zones, you may have heard of blue zones. And the guy who did that research looked at Loma Linda in Southern California as one of the blue zones where people, there's an extraordinary number of people who live to 100 and more. And it's attributed to health, like to diet and so forth. Adventists have a sort of a practice of being vegetarian. I mean, it's not a law or a rule. The rule is more the Jewish dietary laws of clean and unclean foods. But there is also a kind of strongly encouraged vegetarianism, as well as, and they also, I think, put their finger on the Sabbath practice of taking a day and just retreating from the stress and the press of your everyday life, of work and chores, and just to spend a day with your family and go out in nature and do stuff that you maybe wouldn't prioritize in your busy life, which I think I'm not successfully doing that right now, but I'm a fan of that, and I think all of us could really benefit from taking a day or even a half a day and just going for a hike, or probably you do that already, right? Like you might just hang out with friends and not kind of put your to-do list over there. So those were some of the contributing factors. I'm not a vegetarian. I was for a period of time, and for ecological reasons, I aspire to being a vegetarian. So maybe I'll get back to that one day when I'm a stronger person. So the microphone's here if you want to, I guess, queue up. Do you need? I can also just repeat for people.
Writing down. I'm a mostly vegetarian for the last year or so. Mostly. But as I've been a vegetarian, my understanding of meat and where it comes from has increased, in terms of what's slaughtered, how it's slaughtered, all of that. Living without it has increased. So, I guess my question would be, living without God, has your understanding of what God is increased or transformed? And what as you, I guess my question is, what was your understanding of God as a person, a concept, a definition, prior to this and then after?
That's not where I thought you were going, so thank you. So what's my concept of God before and my concept of God now? I think before, my concept of God was changing over a long period of time. So in the beginning, I had a very personal concept of God that was like a being. I don't know that I had everybody, if they imagine God, probably conjures up some kind of visual image in their head. Some painting you saw once or something. So I guess, I never really thought of God in quite those anthropomorphic terms, but I figured it was an intelligence, a being of some kind. Over time, then, I think I went away from God being a being as such to what some liberal theologians describe as sort of the basis of all being, or the thing that allows being to exist, almost like the grid on which everything else is structured, which is still a kind of physicalism that, anyway, this is why it's so hard to talk about, because it's like, what the hell are you talking about? So that, and then now I think I see God now as a social construct that's evolved over time throughout history to achieve some really important goals, social cohesion, sort of obedience to important rules and some unimportant ones, a means of control, social control, again, some of which was helpful and important, and others which was very oppressive and abusive, specifically to women and to others, like not in the majority. So yeah, I think I see God as a creation of the human intellect, or the human longing for answers and explanation. And like I say, I see that as kind of a social necessity over history. I think it happened because it needed to happen. It evolved that way because it was important for humanity to have that during a certain period of time. And I feel like now it's not needed in that same way, and it's sort of archaic, sort of like your appendix, like you don't really need it, and sometimes it gets infected and then you have problems. So like sometimes your God idea gets infected and then you have problems, and it's best just to like get rid of it. So that's kind of where I've been. Yeah. So yeah. Yes.
Yeah. What do you believe is the state of religion in America? Would you say that there's would be better off without it?
Oof, yeah. Boy, I hate these prophetic questions. I mean, I like them, but I'm not good at them. I mean, I think there was a time in the 60s where people thought religion would decline and slowly fade away, and it's done sort of the opposite. Globally, the Pew Research Center did a study that was just, the results were just released a couple weeks ago, that globally religion will increase and that atheists as a proportion of the global population will decrease, in large part because the birth rates of people in religious countries is much higher than birth rates in America and Western Europe especially. So I think it seems like if the prognostication is correct, that atheism versus religion will continue to grow in the world. In our society, boy, I just don't know. Like, it seems like sometimes my own denomination that I came from, it seems to me that it should implode any minute. But it doesn't, right? It doesn't. It just, I mean, the millennial generation is more fundamentalist than I ever was in the church. And so it has this ability to reinvent itself and regenerate itself. So I have a great deal of sort of fearful respect for religion. Like, I think it will continue to reinvent itself and be a part of our society. I was talking to someone, was it last night at dinner or some other time, about racism and homophobia as two comparisons. So the church in America did a nice job of shifting its view about slavery and race. The Mormon church is still just like now kind of revising their views officially about black people and their supposed inferiority according to their book, because they have to. Like, you can't sustain a viewpoint like that in our society. And you can see it happening with homosexuality in America as well. Churches are going, well, actually, that text doesn't really mean that. And so I always ask them, like, is it just a coincidence that you just now found the right interpretation of that text right as the society is shifting its view about it? Or, so it's just happened to coincide like that. So I think that they'll continue to, on social issues, modify their views, create new theology to explain how they were wrong before and how actually they have it right now, and just kind of keep morphing like that. So, but I think the end result of that is that religion becomes more humane as it moves along. It becomes more humanistic, and which I think is a good thing for all of us, because I don't think religion is going to go away. I don't think did you ever see the movie A Day Without a Mexican? You didn't? Wow, living in Phoenix, it does sound terrible, but I know everybody got really quiet. It's actually pro-immigration film. It's like, basically the idea is, what would it be like if we woke up tomorrow and all the Mexicans were just gone? And it's a comedy. It's funny about, like, nobody's garden gets tended, and the children don't get to school, and it's kind of making fun of the way that white people depend on cheap labor to get things done. It's more of a joke on rich white people, but it kind of illustrates, like, and I was thinking of something like a parody like that, A Day Without a Religion. We will all wake up and all religion is gone, and like, you wonder whether people will know how to live their lives, who they would turn to for support and help. So I think religion can be a force for good in the world, and I think the more we do our job, the more religion will be required to be a force for good in the world. And I'm not on a mission to sort of abolish religion just because I think it's impractical. I don't think that's realistic. Yeah. Thank you. I'm not surprised, yes. Yeah, that's very likely.
Said something contrary, and it was the first thing you said in your presentation was that racism, xenophobia were on the increase. I don't believe that. I think the exposure of it. It's like it's like, because you just said here that churches are now waking up to the idea. I mean, we clearly are, as a country, embracing marriage equality. So it's basically stuff that's coming out of the open. Do I have fewer cockroaches in my apartment because I can't see them, or is it they're all living behind the refrigerator?
Right.
So what we've done is we pulled the refrigerator back and brought the exterminator in, and it's shocking how much there still is. But the fact is, we're not gassing people. We find genocide obscene universally.
Right.
We are opening ourselves up to marriage equality. We're just doing things in this century that we would never even have imagined. In the last century. I didn't know what a gay person was when I was young.
Yeah, Bill Burr has a great thing on that in his new comedy special on Netflix, where he talks about how people sort of outgrow, like they age past like the social developments of their time. And I think what you're saying is also true. We tolerate less. So the things that were already there are just now seem reprehensible to us.
I think the idea fits really well in your talk, but I think there's probably a little more research on that, because I think it's a really important point. And it's not that we're getting worse; it's that we're exposing it, and that's grinding the gear.
Well, I guess my point in my talk was more that people are retrenching into some of those views. People are digging their heels in more, and I think
challenged, and they don't like that.
Right, especially politicians who can't, without great loss, say I was wrong. I'm going to change my mind. And this is what's really interesting about what I've done, which is not what you asked, but it bears mentioning. That people, when I changed, when I went through this whole experience, overwhelmingly people were like, that's amazing, that's so courageous, more people should do that, blah, blah, blah. And then when people actually change their mind, they get attacked by people. So for example, Ayaan Hirsi Ali, in her early books, was very, almost violently critical of Islam, in a way that I just couldn't embrace, like what she was saying. Now, in her recent book, she's stepping back from some of those more extreme views and saying, we need to work with Islam to reform Islam so that it can be a more cooperative partner in the world and stop killing people. But the way to do that is not to say death to all Islam. So she changed. But people are still quoting her from 2007 saying, yes, but she's a bigot. And I'm saying, well, give the woman an opportunity to experience something. And in her new book, she said, I was wrong. I did not foresee the Arab Spring. I didn't think people had it in them to stand up to their oppressive regimes, and they do. And so she's like, well, okay, maybe I was wrong. And I think that idea of saying, well, I was wrong, I need to change my mind, is a virtue that we instantly recognize in others, but which we feel is a detriment in ourselves. We hide that from everyone. We don't want anyone to think we were wrong. And I think that's something to really think about individually. Yes, we haven't been over here. Let's come over here.
I have a question. So you said when you left the church, your boss came down and sat with you and said the class that you were in Afghans. What happened? How did he explain that? What was that conversation?
Yeah, I was frequently in the principal's office, so to speak, in the conference president's office to account for things. Yeah, the question was, how did the ending of my career happen? I said that I was, had these conversations with my boss. So and I guess I want to preface this by saying that in the end, he was right. So I don't want anything that I'm saying to say that he was being unethical in any way in any of the things he did. He was simply holding me to the standard that I agreed to hold as a Seventh-day Adventist pastor, and I could no longer do that. And I was trying to dance around that reality by sort of creating my own version of Adventism, which he said, I don't recognize that as Adventism. And I think a lot of people don't recognize it as Adventism. And then I eventually said, yeah, maybe you're right. Maybe it's not. And so, for instance, it included the possibility of a long age of the earth. I know it's very shocking. The possibility that gay and lesbian and transgender people are not sinning when they have relationships with other people. That the church, the Seventh-day Adventist Church, is not the remnant church of Bible prophecy, meaning that it is the church that is sort of God's last group of people to bring truth to the whole world. I just found that almost laughable at the end of my career. So in all of those ways, I really wasn't on board with the mission of the church. And the focus of my ministry was more on community development, neighborhood improvement, working with other nonprofits and other religious institutions in the city to make the city a better place for the people who usually find it to be not a great place to live, the poor and, minorities. And they said, well, that's great that you're doing that, but that's not the mission. The mission of the church is to baptize people and tell them about Jesus. And I said, yeah, that's happening too when people realize that we're good people in the world and they want to be a part of it. Then we invite them and welcome them in. But we're not going to first you come sit in the pew, listen to these long sermons, and then we'll invite you to be a part of our goodness in the world. I was turning that around the other way and saying, well, here's what we're doing for the homeless. Why don't you come join us? And then if they're looking for community, like probably many of you are interested in the community aspect of this, then they would join, not because we were Adventist, but almost in spite of the fact that we were Adventist, because we were doing interesting things that they wanted to be a part of. I don't know how many times, and this is again where I probably, if anybody's being unethical, it was me. I was saying to people, yeah, it's Adventist, and there's these things that you don't really have to believe those, because I really don't believe them either, but we're doing some good in the world, and you should come join us and be a part of it. And they're like, okay. But I'm like, if you ever move to Wichita or Georgia or Washington, D.C., then don't expect the church to be like this. You'll probably find it to be different. So it was just it was time. It was past time. Yes.
Speaking of narratives and shifting narratives, I think a lot of the reason people dig their heels in and kind of retrench is out of fear of things that are changing. What have you found are some ways to help people overcome that fear and realize that change doesn't mean, you're not getting rid of everything that you are, everything that is good about your history?
Man, I think the thing that's so hard, but I think so essential, is to have people just verbalize that fear. I wish that I could get people, when I was in a certain community back east, when the neighborhood was changing from an all-white community to a very diverse community. And people were freaking out, but they weren't racist. They wanted to make sure you knew they weren't racist. And I just wanted to ask them, what are you afraid of? Well, I'm not afraid of anything. I'm like, well, that's not true. We're all afraid of something. Just tell me what you're afraid of. And the people use euphemisms in Hollywood. When I was a pastor, people would say, we're worried that we're losing the traditional character of this neighborhood. I'm like, okay, well that's, and what they meant was high-rise buildings where before it was all this low-slung, single-family dwellings. And so it was not in my backyard. We don't want this apartment building, and it's going to invite those poor people. They're going to live there because it's affordable housing. And so they're afraid they're going to lose the traditional character of the neighborhood. So then I would say, well, what is that? What is it you like about that? It's sort of a Socratic type of method. What is it about the traditional character of the neighborhood that you value? Well, I like, being able to just walk to the store and not have to step over homeless people on my way to the store. And so homelessness, so we should work on that. That's what we should probably try to figure out the answer to. And actually building affordable housing is the way to help homeless people not live on the street. So can't you see how this is actually a solution, not a problem? So I think helping people just express their fears and say what they're afraid of, and most of those fears are not rational. And so to help them expose for them, because I find that if you tell people you're not rational, that's probably not an opening to a really productive conversation. It isn't for me. So I feel like helping people take those steps, like a therapist would do, what is it about that? Or why do you feel what makes you afraid of that? Because you don't know. So it's just that you don't know people. Or it's that Thai community is moving in and they're building a farmer's market, and I don't know about that Thai farmer's market. Have you ever been to the Thai farmer's market? Have you talked to any of those people? So I think just asking people to step into what they're saying and own it can reveal some of the kind of the BS around it too. So I don't know. I did the same thing this morning on Facebook. This guy was like, you were an atheist before you started the Year Without God. Therefore, the whole Year Without God was unethical and a big PR stunt. And I was like, wow, you know so much about me. Who are you again? I don't think we've ever met in person. And my sense is that he's afraid that of what my story reveals about his story. And I'm not even telling him he has to give up his story. That's up to him. He can figure that out for himself. But my story reveals a fissure in his story. And I'm interested in that. That's what I'm interested in. I'm interested in knowing, why is he responding that way? And so very early on, when I was attacked by people, I thought, I got to figure out a way not to onboard all this anxiety and anger. And so I just adopted this mantra that that when people do that kind of thing, express fear in that way, that it says more about themselves than it says about me. So it's really not, and that's not to shield myself from all criticism, because I want to be open to good criticism, but the question that interests me is, why is that person responding that way when so many other people are responding in a different way? And I don't know, some people may not be able to get there, but I hope that kind of helps. Let me come here, and then we'll go back.
So, piggybacking on the fear thing, I think a lot of the reason my family remains within the church is that fear of the afterlife and that fear of being alone. My mother has this envisionment of heaven in her head where we'll all be together again. And what she doesn't quite understand is that is causing distance in this life. This life that we have, she's actually pushing us away. Right. How did you deal? I mean, you have a family, you have children that you raise, I would assume, Seventh-day Adventists. How do you...
Sorta. Yeah.
Okay. Ish.
Yeah.
How would you explain that fear of the afterlife or a heaven thereafter, which is something, that promise?
Yeah.
That...
Yeah, it's tough. I mean, sometimes the truth has bad news associated with it, you know? And the bad news is that this is the only life we get. Or, I mean, maybe and what I said to another group once is that's only bad news because we've been told to expect more than that. Right? So we've been told to expect to live forever. And so if you've been taught to expect to live forever, then the realization that you're not going to live forever comes as very bad news. Right? But if you had a realistic expectation to live one life like everyone else, then that's just normal. I mean, I think that's what people just become accustomed to living. I never was sort of a hellfire and brimstone kind of preacher. And the more liberal I got over time, the more I kept teaching my members that if we're going to experience heaven, it's going to be here. So we better get busy creating what we hope will be true one day. We better be busy creating it now. And so I put a lot of emphasis in my church on, hey, if you think, as the Bible says, there'll be no more sorrow and no more crying and no more hunger, then we should work to eradicate hunger now, because that's what it means to be faithful to that vision of one day there being no more hunger. But a lot of Christians are like, well, there'll be no more hunger one day. We can just sort of bide our time and make as much money as we want and play with our toys, and then one day will be no more hunger magically, And so I don't know. Like it's a really difficult one for people who have that expectation. I would say, I don't know, maybe an analogy. I make these up analogies in my head, like on the fly. So if this doesn't work, I apologize. But it'd be almost like having a family member who discovers they have a terminal illness and they've got 6 months to live, which is horribly bad news, right? So what's the first impulse that you're going to have? Like, we should make the best of these next 6 months, right? Like, let's go the place you always wanted to go. Let's eat the thing you always wanted to, like, have your best food and your most enjoyable time with the grandkids or whatever it is you're going to do. So I think that impulse, maybe a person could relate to that. Like, look, if I was terminally ill, wouldn't you want to spend time with me now because that's all you're going to get? Like, if you think hell is my terminal illness, like, let's just say she's right and you're going to hell, that we're all going to hell. Like, wouldn't you want to spend the time we've got? Like, let's do that. I don't know. I fortunately am not faced with people who think I'm going to hell, although they may think I'm going to hell, but they're not. Adventists don't really have hell like that too, so I was spared a little bit of that. But yeah, I probably have really not given you a very good answer. I'm sorry. I just think it's a difficult thing. Like, it's just bad news for people, and yeah, it's sort of like, again, the terminal, like your doctor says, unfortunately, you've got a really bad disease. I don't know what to tell you. Like, it's just bad news. And if people are expecting to live forever to find out they're not, they're going to have to adjust to that reality. Yes. Purple shirt. Hi.
I just actually had more of a practical question. I wasn't raised in a religious household, but I have some acquaintances who are religious. And so whenever something bad happens or whatever, they seem to turn to prayer or the Bible. That seems to comfort them, and that's fine. I don't know if you did that as a pastor, but I'm curious if you did, and then stop doing that. I was just wondering what your coping mechanism was. Did you turn to journaling or learn to knit? Or
I should learn to knit. That's a good idea. It's a great question. I mean, I do think the idea that there's this psalm that says, when I'm overwhelmed, Or when the water threatens to wash over me, I will turn to the rock that is higher than I, right? So it's the image of like a beach scene and there's crashing waves, and you're going to get swept out into the ocean in this wave, but you would cling to the strong rock that's going to prevent you from being swept out to sea. So that's God. Like God is this strong rock that you can hold on to that won't allow you to be swept out into oblivion. So yeah, there is a kind of sense of like, who's the rock? Like where'd the rock go? And I think a lot of people that I've talked to, and I would include myself there, have really realized how many resources that they have within themselves. I think one of the really pernicious things about some religion is that it teaches us that we are worthless and broken, which admittedly I think we are broken, but irreparably broken and incapable of doing anything good for ourselves, which I think is a terrible lie and really dangerous for people. So I think part of the coping mechanism for me was learning that I'm not horrible. Like I can manage, you know? And when I can't manage, I have friends that help me manage. And I've also, I think a lot of agnostics and atheists have taken up practices of mindfulness and meditation, where I just, when I was a Christian, I would say, well, God has a plan, and I sort of like knew no matter what happened to me that plan was continuing and I was going to be okay. Often now what I say, like when things are really bad at work, for example, I say to myself, I'm not going to die, right? Like I probably am going to go home tonight and have dinner. Like I probably am not going to die. Like I might, but I probably won't. So like that's the worst thing that could happen. So the worst thing that's going to happen is probably not going to happen. So I'll be okay. Like in the end, I'm going to make it through this day and I'm not going to die. So I don't know if that works for you, but I just try to like relativize it, and say like it could be worse, which is probably true for everyone. Yeah. Yes.
So when you actually have a talk with your boss, let's say, were you at that time in doubt of God or the religion? Because we can agree there probably could be different things.
Right.
The other thing is the name of the lecture is A Year Without God. When did you call that? Were you thinking taking a vacation of God for a year?
Right.
Or actually you decided to start to read about God for a year? Were you thinking you might come back, or?
I almost went down a rabbit trail in my talk about that, so I'm glad you asked it. When I left my job with my boss and all of that, I was not considering being an atheist. That didn't cross my mind at that time. And I didn't even think I was done with Christianity or religion. I just thought maybe I'll get hired by a more liberal Adventist church, or maybe I'll be able to find an evangelical church or maybe I'll start my own church. So those were all possible ideas. When I did Year Without God, people have asked me this so much, I've had to kind of really, really think about this a lot over the last 18 months. I would say that on January 1 of Year Without God, my suspicion was that there was not a God. I very much wanted there to be a God, because that was my narrative, right? In spite of all the holes that people can punch in the narrative, right, that God is this vindictive monster in the Old Testament, and all the problems with the Bible, and all those things, yes, I know all of those things. I've been to school and, have 3 degrees in theology and all of that. So I understand all of that, but it was still my narrative. And the narrative basically went, the world was beautiful and perfect, we screwed it up, and God is putting it all back together again, and it's going to end happily ever after, which is awesome. Like, all the pain and sorrow is going to go away, we're going to have the best of everything, and all the bad stuff's going to go away. So that's, that was the narrative, and I liked it, and I wanted it to be true. So, but I didn't want it to be true bad enough to believe it when it wasn't true, right, anymore. So that was my quest. For a year, I was going to really put those beliefs on the firing line, really put them in the hot seat and say, can I come out of this a Christian? Or even just a theist? And so that was kind of where I was at. Yes, over here and back down here. Oh, yeah.
Okay, so what do you or would you say is the religious camp looking at you now saying, why don't you just do something else? Why is this? Aren't you just doing the same thing
by talking like this?
By proselytizing the other side now.
Yeah, well, I would push it back if that was the statement. I guess I would push back that I don't feel like I'm proselytizing. I was never really a proselytizer when I was a Christian. It just didn't come naturally to me. It felt like being a used car salesman, and I just wasn't really into that. I hate buying a car, for that very reason, or I just hate that kind of high pressure sales thing. So I don't feel like what I'm doing here today is proselytizing. If anything, I'm speaking to the choir probably. But there are probably a lot of you that are on the fence, or you don't know what you think, or you're exploring, which is great. My thing is much more of a Socratic approach, where I'm like, do you have a question about your beliefs? Yes, I do. What is that question? Here it is. Okay, well, let's talk about that. And maybe you end up a Christian at the end of that, or maybe you end up a Buddhist at the end of that. I don't know. Like, it doesn't matter to me. I just want you to be honest, people to be honest about what I think is oppressive is when religion says you can't ask that question. All the evidence points to a very old earth. That human beings go back 200,000 years from, to their ancestors. But no, you're not allowed to even consider that possibility or ask that question, because it would mean that Genesis isn't true. And if Genesis isn't true, then the whole thing unravels. So you can't go there. And I think that can't go there, especially with children going through school. It's, Richard Dawkins calls it child abuse. I'm not sure I have that much gumption. But I can see why, even though I may not choose those words, I can see why he would. And I think it is borderline abusive to people to tell them they can't explore all the realm that's available to us to explore. So that's my interest. Free thinking, critical thought, open inquiry, and that's for me what I want to do. And I'm really only doing this because people ask me to. Like, I'm not like putting out a shingle necessarily and saying, come invite me to Phoenix, like people have said, would you come? And I said, sure. Like, if my experience is helpful to someone else who's going through that, which was not my intention back in January of 2014. I never thought, oh, I'll be this kind of inspiration for all these other people. I was just doing my own thing. I'd been a blogger for 12 years, and so to blog what I do was just sort of like breathing for me. Like, it was just natural. So, yeah, I mean, if it's not interesting to people and people don't want to hear from me anymore, they'll stop asking and I'll stop talking. You can kill this anytime, but let me go to one person that hasn't asked a question. Let me go right back here.
Yeah, I got a question. Was there a book, article, or person who really helped propel you at this point in your life?
Let me see. I mean, I think in the beginning it was Alain de Botton, who wrote Religion for Atheists, and a philosopher named Ronald Dworkin, who wrote a little book as a collection of his talks called Religion Without God. And those were the first ones, for me, that I was like, oh, I could do what I love, which is help people make meaning out of their lives and help me make meaning out of my life without the God component. In fact, right toward the end of my pastoral ministry, I felt like I came to this place where I was like, whether or not there's a God really isn't the important question. The important question is, what are we going to do today with what we have? That's kind of important. And maybe there's a God, maybe there isn't. If there was a God who wanted us to find him, he probably would have made that a little bit easier to do. And we were musing last night the possibility that if there is a God, God's up there going, would you guys just forget about me for a minute and get on with what you're supposed to be doing? Like, we'll get to the other part later. So maybe that. But so I think I lost my train of thought now. Wow. I just went out. Remind me where I was? Oh, yeah, that. And then when I got into The Year Without God, a really great book is With or Without God by Greta Vosper. Have any of you heard of Greta Vosper? She's a United Church of Canada minister in Toronto. She still has a congregation, and belief in God is not a litmus test in her church. There are plenty of people who believe in some type of God and plenty of people who don't believe in any gods. And they have a church, and she's still on the payroll of the church with the United Church of Canada. She wrote a great book called With or Without God, in which she talks about her journey. I think it's fantastic. Do we have time for a couple more? All right. Let me go here, and then in the very back in the blue shirt, and I'll be around afterwards too.
Yeah. So I really don't know a whole lot about the SDA community, but it sounds kind of fairly on the fundamental edge of the spectrum. And I was just wondering how you felt your story might be different if you were from some more liberal but very religious church. Maybe had a few less of those bumps in the road.
Yeah, I think it's possible that I wouldn't be where I am today because, say, for example, the Episcopal Church in America allows for a great latitude of beliefs about a lot of the things that were problematic for me. I don't know whether I think that would have been a good thing or a bad thing, though. Like, in a way, I think, yes, I probably would have been able to keep that narrative together for a bit longer, maybe forever, my whole rest of my life, which would have provided some career stability maybe and meaningful work and all of that. On the downside, I wouldn't have thought all the things I've been thinking the last couple of years, which I quite like. I mean, the kind of intellectual journey that I've been on and the things I've learned and the people I've gotten to chat with about their loss of faith. I mean, and right now we're going through this huge, sea change, I think, in the United States where there are more and more people that are willing to say they don't have faith. And there aren't places, aside from the few Sunday assemblies and groups like this, there really isn't yet a big place for people like that to come with their questions and come with their doubts and come with their wonderings, and so I'm excited to be where I am now. So, but yes, I think if I had been Episcopal all my life or, Presbyterian, United Church of Christ or whatever, I probably would have found a much easier time. Yeah. Yes, sir.
Going through this, how has your view or has your view changed towards the belief systems or organizations that are very intolerant and do not even believe other people have a right to live if they don't follow their belief?
Like
like Westboro Baptist Church, or like?
No, I'm talking about other places in the world. There's some places in the world where if you wrote something on a blog,
you could be killed. Yeah.
Against a particular leader or against a particular deity, you would be killed with it.
Right. I mean, my views on that haven't changed at all. I mean, I think that's horrible, and whatever mechanisms need to be employed to change that, need to happen. I just had a young man write to me from Bangladesh who's an atheist. He's about 17, and he wants me to publish his story on my blog because he can't have a blog of his own. You may have heard that 3 atheist bloggers have been hacked to death in Bangladesh in the last month or 2. So, yeah, I'm interested in creating freedom, in other places as much. I mean, I'm just one guy, but yeah, I'm very much in favor of pluralism, this idea that we live in a marketplace of ideas and that if you want your ideas to receive a hearing, then you need to submit them to the society for consideration. Like you don't get. This was my problem with Christianity in America too, is that Christianity has enjoyed privilege, a privileged place in the public square, that their ideas were accepted without examination. Now, because the society is much more pluralistic, people are saying, well, we're not so sure about that idea. We need to explore that a bit more. And then after exploration, they say, well, no, we actually think gay, lesbian, transgender people are just fine, just like the rest of us. And now Christians are mad because their privileged view is being relativized by everybody else's view. Well, I just think that's democracy. Like, I think that's just how we relate our ideas. If you have an idea and I disagree with you, I'm free to say I disagree with you without being killed. And hopefully, like some people are still killed even in this country for their views, but hopefully that's changing, and I think we need to do whatever we can to support those peacefully support those kind of changes. I'm not in favor of killing people to stop them from killing people. I mean, to me, that's just insanity. But yeah, thanks.
All right, that kind of wraps things up. I just want to reiterate our next assembly is going to be kind of a town hall format, May 24th at 5 p.m. back here. And really it's an opportunity for us to just kind of pool our ideas and resources and kind of talk through what I've learned and a lot of the other organizers have learned over the last 8 months, and really addressing this question of how do you just create community? Like, how do you just get people together? I mean, it's almost impossible, right? It's very difficult, and especially here in Phoenix with our geographic distance, and getting people together once a month for something like this is great, and this is fun and fantastic. But I don't know if I wouldn't really call this community. I've made some fantastic relationships through this whole process, and my hope is that a lot of you would also join in and continue to dialogue, and that these things can kind of develop organically instead of us, trying to force it, and see if these things, we can be humans about this, and really just kind of explore the potential. So we'd love to have you there, hear your ideas. We're going to kind of talk through a variety of issues, and then see if we can continue this thing on until we all die. So thanks so much for coming, and it was a pleasure to have you here, Ryan. Thanks so much. And if we want to just kind of hang out, maybe something that would be fun is, when we're all just done right now, is just introduce yourself to someone that you don't know, and just maybe ask them why they're here, and what they're, ask some kind of interesting question, and start a conversation like we normally do, and be human and that sort of thing. So cool. Thanks for coming, and have a great day.